Down to the last few games here for the Danbury hat trick. 6 left in the regular season here in 2024-25 before the playoff push begins. Wyatt Kopelman here with the general manager, Matt Voity, as the hat trick swept the Dashers Hockey Club for the second time this season. And Matt, to go right into it, back on Saturday, this team got 4 goals in the third period. What were some of your takeaways as this team really pulled away for the sweep that weekend?
I thought Friday night we were pretty scary. We were scary good, which was good to see. I think Saturday, we played really well. I think to begin with, I think we kind of had a lull, which I kind of expected, and then we picked it up in the third to their credit, and I think it's good to see that we needed 9 points last weekend, and we got it.
Yeah, it was a bit of a different weekend, even different than the one before where it began on Thursday. This one, it had a makeup game on Wednesday against HC Venom. So this team gets that much-needed 3 points over there at McCann Arena. Probably felt a little bit like a home atmosphere in some sense, right down 84. And then this team comes back and faces a relatively familiar opponent in the Dashers Hockey Club. What do you believe went so well for this team offensively to score 15 goals in these last 2 games?
I think we were able to take advantage of the ice we were given. I think guys were pretty sharp on finishing their looks. I think everyone was involved in the offensive end of it, and obviously we took care of our own end. So.
All right, so the Hat-Tricks, they get those 3 wins against HC Venom and the Dashers Hockey Club as well. I want to ask you a little bit about what you've seen out of the rookies as of late. You've had Zach Ross and Dimitri Christou here for a couple of weeks now. They've gotten their chance to start. They've had their respective shifts. And then you also bring in Nick Naltz, who started on Saturday. What are some of your biggest observations from them thus far?
I think they've acclimated well. I mean, obviously they have things to learn, and some of it can be a little bit of a shift going from D3 to pro, especially just the atmosphere at the games. But I think they've done a pretty good job of learning some of those lessons so far and adding to what we're doing.
What are you telling them as they're getting on the ice for the first time out of any FPHL franchise? It's in Danbury, where the culture is really well known, and there are a lot of veterans here, some from the championship team 2 years ago, some who have been here for a season now, like Chase Harwell, and is now here again this year. What are you telling them as they're starting to get acclimated here?
The rookies? Honestly, I just tell them to be themselves. Like, don't worry about making a mistake. Don't worry about trying to be something you're not. Just be you and trust yourself, and let's just see where it goes. Sometimes you just don't know what a guy's going to do until you put him into a game.
So the Hat-Tricks, they're getting a little bit of refresh here with the talent they have on the ice. They have Nick Naltz, they have Dimitri Christou as well. Also wanted to ask you a little bit about this past weekend because, as mentioned, this team played 3 games in 4 days. How do you believe this team handled that quick turnaround from HC Venom going into the Dasher series? How much do you think that kind of reflected what this team will be faced with in the playoffs in the coming weeks?
I thought we handled it pretty well. I mean, I think our energy was really good. I think our energy's been pretty good the last couple months, really. I don't think we've had the dips that we were having earlier in the year where it was like really high and then really low. I think we've been good. I think the boys get it. They know where they are in the season right now, and they know what's in front of them, and they know what we have to do, and they're up for every game, and they're up for every challenge.
All right, so speaking of up for the challenge, this team has scored on the power play in each of the last 4 games, and against Binghamton also got 2 shorthanded goals as well. From the special teams perspective, you think this team will really be able to look forward to using that as an advantage, particularly on the power play this weekend against the Black Bears in the playoffs as well? Yeah,
I mean, I think any game, especially this time of year, power play and PK they can be huge factors and deciding factors in games and series. So we are definitely looking to lean on those. Obviously, you never know how many calls you're going to get, but we're going to be leaning on our power play a lot, and our PK, obviously, to be as close to 100% as possible.
And speaking of the special teams as well, do you think your team, with what it's learned about each other through this point in the season, with how much it's grown, whether it be the rookies or even the veterans and what they're learning about themselves, do you think this team is kind of cutting down on penalties it doesn't need to take at certain points of the game?
Yeah, I think the last couple of weeks we've probably put ourselves in some tough positions. I think in Hudson Valley we took some penalties late that we didn't need to take, which I think the boys did learn from and were kind of smarting from the next day. I think we are smart much more smart as to when to take a penalty if we need to take a penalty, and just kind of staying out of the box. Really, a lot of our penalties early on were just us not moving our feet and reaching with our stick or reaching with our hands. So.
And do you think that this team is also cutting down on chasing pucks and hopefully creating some good scoring chances for itself early on in games now?
It's coming along. I think, offensively, we're layering a little bit better, having a better F3, and that F3 just being responsible and understanding where F1 and F2 are. When we lose possession and the other teams come out of the zone, I think we're definitely progressing with that and getting better week to week with that.
I know a couple of weeks ago, actually it was more like 6 weeks ago, that's how quickly the second half of the season has gone, Matt. You talked a lot about how much this team has to still own its starts and if not own starts and find a way to climb out of early holes. What do you believe your team is doing now in terms of that to stay competitive in games, even against Binghamton last week?
I think what you're probably hitting on is just being patient with the game and not, wow, we scored a goal or we lost a goal, and kind of losing those couple minutes, after. We've talked about, when we score a goal, those 5 minutes after. I think there's been a pattern where score a goal and within the next 5 minutes or at that 5-minute mark, another one goes in, one goes in for them. And we want to, that's where you got to control the pace of the game. When you score a goal, you don't want them to score one, but you have to keep them off the board for at least the next 5 to 10 minutes. And I think when you're able to do that, even if they do score the next one, say 12 minutes later, at least you're controlling the momentum. At least it shows that your shifts are a little bit more steady than frantic.
I know you also had talked a lot about the momentum that this team has gotten with the chemistry as well. As this team has just about a week left before the postseason begins. Of course, it has a 3-3 with Mississippi. It still has a home game against Watertown. What do you think this team is doing off the ice that's helping, if there is anything yet? I know the temperatures are warming up now.
I think they're just getting out more as a group, because the temperatures are warming up. So, it could be wiffle ball, it could be just, hanging out in the park. I know that sounds bad, but just doing things more together. I think in the winter you end up kind of just hanging out in your room playing video games sometimes, and or just kind of hanging out there. But now the sun's out later, and I think it's a good group of guys. They all want to hang out with each other, so I think just having that to start helps everything.
And do you see that translating onto the ice in practice or even in film when you're watching, just to see everybody really backing each other up or being willing to correct each other?
Yeah, I think it's been a huge difference, really from the beginning. I think some of the guys we added definitely added to the culture and, to what was here, the core of what was here. And I think the core accepted them, and it's been great.
Patricks, they have a chance to get 6 points against Binghamton this week, and it's also alumni night on Saturday, which should be a very exciting time. Before we kind of get more back into the progression this team's making in practice this week, just, of course, not to forget, alumni night, there's Billy McCreary going into the Ring of Honor. You have Gordy Bonnell, who won a cup here 2 years ago. What does that mean for you to see them go into the Ring of Honor? And, of course, what do you think it means to the players, too?
Well, I think, both guys certainly deserve it. I think to see Gordy go in, he, I think he was probably underrated by some people. What he provided to that team and what he was willing to do, and he wasn't necessarily a super loud guy or kind of one of these cartoon characters, but he was tough, and was a block shot, a fight, standing in front of the net, he did it, and he was a huge reason why we won a championship. And obviously Billy, from the beginning being here and starting this and building that championship team and really kind of providing a framework here with all the teams, with the, you had the NA, the Fed team, it's something that's very unique, and it's a bit of it's a landmark now in hockey, Danbury, so.
When you consider the impact they left here, of course, Jonny and Gonzo, they're co-ed coaches this season. They also have A&Cs on their chest. How well do you think they've kind of carried on the responsibilities of player development, hockey ops, getting wins on the ice from everything that, of course, Billy left, but also the legacies that the players had that are going to the Ring of Honor?
they're in a very unique position compared to anybody previously. I think as coaches and players, and not even just a player assistant, their head coach and their frontline players, I think there's been a learning curve, but I think they've taken to it. I think they've definitely learned some things over the last 5-6 months, to help them with that. Is, a lot of it's just how you communicate to players when you're, it's tough when you have pads on and it's like, well, where do I stop as a player and start as a coach sometimes? But they've done well, and it helps, with their background. They deserve a lot of respect off the bat from anybody that comes in that room and interacts with them. So, I think they've done a really good job, and I think, as time goes on, maybe 10 years or so, they're, or much earlier than that, they're going to be great coaches. I think, if you can do it as a player with the pressure that you have on you as a player, when you don't have that pressure as a player, it's probably, I hate to say easier, but it's probably a little bit easier for sure. So, whenever they're done playing, I think they're going to be amazing coaches.
What challenges have you seen them overcome, particularly as someone who's coached goalies, who's been here since the beginning of the Hat Tricks as well?
I think that communication piece, I think it's, how do you communicate as a coach, as a head coach and a player? I think they've done a really good job figuring that out. I think that was kind of a tough one. I think also thinking about the team in a different way, kind of taking more of a 30,000 foot view, kind of thinking about, okay, well, how does this affect other people a little bit more than maybe you would as a player? I think probably spending a little bit more time with film, things like that. But they've taken to it. They've done a really great job at it.
Is scouting something that goes into that when you're also on the ice? You have matchups to worry about. You have certain tendencies to look at on film. Is scouting a big part of that co-head coach responsibility in addition to playing?
Yeah, it's a shared responsibility. We're all looking at the games. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like we all have to look at them. We love this, and this is what we do, and we look at the games, and we all come in and have our own viewpoints and opinions, and we come together and we make a coherent message. So yeah, that's a big part of if you're on staff, if you're a coach or on the bench, that you're watching the games, and even as GM, you're watching the games and you know what's going on.
I remember I spoke with Jake Ratcliffe last Wednesday in about how strong this team has been down the stretch of the second half of the season. It's won a great deal of games over its last 28. I believe it's 22 of its last 28 games that the Hat Tricks have won, and then they also have points in 22 of their last 24. I asked him a little bit about what he thinks the locker room, the sense in the locker room is as it relates to translating this into postseason success. Do conversations about the Cup team from 2 years ago ever come up as motivation to let newer guys know, not even just rookies, but those who were with different FPHL clubs and weren't here 2 years ago? Do those ever come up as motivation?
Maybe indirectly. I don't think there's back in 22, 23 as much as it is I think there's guys who have their rings, who wear their rings. I'm one of them. Although that's a little bit more of a superstition now. As a goalie, you get a lot of superstitions about, if I have to do this, or else we're not going to have a good game. And that's a whole other segment for you, Wyatt. But I think there's that end of it, and I think there's the other end of it where, since we've been winning the last couple months, the boys see the response in the arena, and you have some veterans who are like, that's nothing. Wait till we get to the second or third round of playoffs. And I think that excites them, because I think there's been a lot of love from the fans to our players since day one. And, that means a lot to the players, and they want to give that to the fans. They want to make the fans happy. So, and I think once you get going here and you start to win, you realize just how fun it can be. And some of these guys haven't won in the last couple of years. So it's kind of like, wow, this is what it's like. Like, I love this. I want to keep it going. So, are there some lessons that we've learned? Yeah, I mean, we'll probably rely on some of those experiences, directly or indirectly. But I think, right so far, it's been a little bit more indirect and kind of, the atmosphere around things and how the guys who've been there and who do have a ring kind of carry themselves and handle these situations late in the season.
And this team has played very frequently at home over the month of March. It has had 5 home games throughout this point, and it seems like it's really starting to take advantage of home ice as opposed to perhaps earlier in the season when this team had to take wins on the road and then take wins at home to stay competitive in the division. How much do you believe your players have embraced the meaning of playing at home so often down here in the second half?
I think they love it. I mean, I think our travel earlier in the season, like, I'm not making excuses, but it was definitely challenging at times, especially around Thanksgiving. That was a little crazy. So I think it helps the bodies too when you can sleep in your own bed and you wake up and you have morning skate and then you're just you can go do your own thing. You don't have to go back on a bus to a hotel. I think it mentally and physically helps you a lot.
Well, it certainly helped the Hat-Tricks a lot, and they have a home game against the Binghamton Black Bears on Saturday. Matt, I also want to ask you about the scoring over the last 3 games. I know we talked about it a little bit earlier, but when you average 6.5 goals per game over a 3-game win streak, and all of a sudden the points are there for the taking, and you want to, of course, capitalize on a lot down the stretch of the regular season ending, how do you believe the scoring can take place against Binghamton in 2 games this weekend?
When it comes to hockey, you just never know how these games are going to go. But look, at this point in the season, I think you have to expect that goals are going to be a little bit harder to come by. And you're going to need the back end of your lineup to contribute, whether it's your third line or your bottom pair D, to contribute and help out, with the top guys. That's kind of how it is at every level when it gets to this point in the season. So, I mean, in terms of an actual number or like how much or what kind of rate we're going to score at, I don't think I couldn't answer that for you. I don't think anybody could. I would just say, like, our scoring is probably going to have to come from, or we're going to have to get contributions from the bottom end of that lineup.
Do you believe the chances that you got in Binghamton 2 weeks ago were enough against a goalie you hadn't seen yet in C.J. Hapward?
I think we need more. I think we needed more. I know we had 2 shorthanded goals and a power play goal, but I think we could have. I think if we were a little bit more connected, I think we could have had more ozone chances. And that, that's a tough team. They know what they're doing. They won a championship last year. I think, it's a little bit different than our previous opponents, and I think we've made some adjustments, and we'll see how it goes.
What are you emphasizing most to the team? Is it more on the mental side, or is it more systems based with the practices that it's going on this week?
Probably a little more systems based, a little more kind of cleaning up what we do in all 3 zones. I think mentally, like, we've been we've been preparing for this part of the year and what it's going to look like and what the expectations are, and it's we actually have to we have to take a step in that department too, and it's one of those things, like, you don't know until you put the lights on and you're in a game situation and those things get tested.
In a week like this, where, of course, the points still matter, this team wants to get second place in the Empire Division, taking on a Binghamton team that's clinched a division as the number 1 spot in the league. What is the sense you have for your team right now? Is it nervous energy, or is it this kind of pent-up energy that it's had from a lot of challenges against Bingo this year?
I'm always nervous.
Me too.
I think it's more. I think on their side it's more pent up. I think they see the boys know where we've come from, and it means a lot to them to go out and prove, hey, you know what? We are this good. We can do this. We can play with this team. And so I think on their end, it's a little bit more pent up.
I also want to ask you a little bit about Dylan Hullaby. He scored in back-to-back games for the first time since his 3-game goal streak about 6 weeks ago, if not 2 months. A little bit after he arrived here, I mean, you remember he just took off right away in terms of his individual production. What have you seen from him as of late that's continued to allow him to have success in his rookie season here in Danbury?
I think he's done a really good job at finding quiet ice, and not just kind of quiet ice where no one can find him, but like where his line mates can find him, and being predictable, essentially in that sense. I think he's gotten a little bit more back to his physicality. I think he probably hit a little bit of a wall in terms of fatigue, which, happens to everyone during a long season like this. But I think in terms of something specific on the ice, I think just being able to find that quiet ice and using his body to kind of open up a little bit more space for his line mates has been huge.
I want to follow up on what you'd said with the fatigue that a lot of rookies encounter rather in this league. When you see someone going through like that, is there a certain thing you could tell them that just doesn't have to relate to their tendencies or habits on the ice that could just help them kind of get over that next stretch of games?
I think that's kind of where you can be a little empathetic and compassionate, like, hey, like, you're just tired, and we're going to keep you out of the lineup, and kind of let you rest, and and just kind of getting them to understand where maybe they can make some adjustments so everyone gets fatigued. I don't care whether you're a rookie or a vet, but you can do things off the ice that help you mitigate the repercussions of that. So, that's kind of where that conversation comes from. We've had that with a couple guys this year. And I think, for Holly, I think, sitting out a little bit, getting a little bit more rest, making some more adjustments was huge for him.
And then when you see guys get out of that particular fatigue or stretch of fatigue, does it just look like a lot of point production, or are there some kind of intangible things that you usually notice? Is it a lack of taking penalties, or is it even something beyond that?
It could be any number of things. I mean, the first thing you notice is the jump in their step. There's a little bit more than there was before. I think you can see where they're mentally anticipating the play. They're on top of the play a little bit more. Their stick is a little bit more consistent, a little bit more accurate. They're hitting a little bit more, hitting a lot more. I think all those things. But the first thing you really notice is the jump in their step.
I want to ask you also about the goaltenders. Of course, Connor McCollum, he gets his 4th career shutout on Friday against the Dashers. We'll start there. Was there anything unique about that shutout, or even that start in a more general sense that you'd seen in the others?
I don't know if he's different in those starts than he is in the other games. I don't think that's the case. I think he was steady. He was quiet. No funny bounces on him, which, he's had a couple this year. I just, I feel bad for him. But I think he was steady. He was quiet. He was able to acclimate to what the game was giving him. And as a goalie, sometimes that's tough. Some goalies love having 40, 45 shots, but then you put 18 on them and 5 go in. He's mature enough to be able to handle what the game's throwing at him, and I think that's probably the key factor in that shutout, but also in his success throughout his time here.
And going into Frankie McClendon, what was something that you've seen from him? Because now he has his most wins in a single season since 2 seasons ago, so he's experienced a lot of success. What did you see in this latest start from him?
I think he's been steady. I think he's been mentally steady. That's something we talked about a lot. I think you can kind of see it in the way he holds his body in his stance. He's a little bit more over the puck, a little bit more, snapping down on it a little bit better. And he's going with the flow of the game. That's a tight game. The Hudson Valley game, it's a tough rink to play in. That's a frustrating game, I think, for some of our guys. And he didn't allow that to get inside of him. He did what he had to do. And, at the end there, I think he had 2 or 3 massive saves for us. But that really is just attributed to the mental work that he's done.
He's put in a lot of mental work, and it's translating to a lot of wins in the net this season. When you have somebody as experienced as McClendon is, even McCollum now coming off of league high wins last season, this season he's already he's got 20 wins as well. Do you notice that there is an extra drive to improve from them, whether it's watching film or just taking extra reps?
Oh yeah, they want to win. They literally could probably let up. I don't think they want to let up a lot of goals, but if it's a shootout 8-7 game, they want to win. And then after the game, obviously they want to cut down. They would want to cut down the goals, but that's what you want out of a goalie, right? Like everyone's like, what do you look for in goalies? And it's like you want a guy that just he wants to win. He hates to lose more than he wants to win. You know what I mean? Kind of like what Kobe said, and just that kind of like warrior mentality, that hunter mentality of like, this is what I got to do. This is what I want. I'm going to go get it. And I think we have that in both those guys now.
Just a brief last question here for you, Matt, as this team looks for those 6 points against Binghamton. Is there anything that you point to in practice this week that you can incorporate or look to capitalize on improving on from your work in practice against the Black Bears this weekend? Anything in particular that you're working on in practice that you want to see get better?
No.
Nothing at all. All right.
I don't know if maybe Binghamton's watching this. I don't want them to see that.
Fair enough. All right, so the Hat-Tricks, they take on the Black Bears for 2 games this weekend. The first game is at Visions Veteran Memorial Arena at 7:30, and on Saturday, the Hat-Tricks welcome in the Black Bears for Alumni Night. Gory Bonnell and Billy McCreary and the other 5 or 4 inductees, that is, will be here at the Danbury Ice Arena. And Matt, it was always great to catch up with you here as the regular season begins to wind down.
Thanks, Wyatt.